What's going on, everybody, and welcome to Vital MTB's cross-country test session.
Wait, I thought these were down-country bikes.
What the heck is a down-country bike?
Well, are they trail bikes?
I guess it depends on how much travel you say a trail bike has.
Well, what are they?
I don't even know at this point. Let's just go find out.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand.
Historically, cross-country bikes have always been lightweight and efficient machines with limited travel and geometry that favors climbing and pedaling performance. On the other hand, trail bikes have always been the Swiss Army knife of mountain bikes, with anywhere from 120 to 150 millimeters of travel, capable of handling most descents, matched with balanced geometry and a manageable overall weight that isn't a burden to pedal. In recent years, the line between cross-country and trail bikes has begun to blur as World Cup cross-country racing has steadily moved towards more aggressive and technical courses, while everyday riders are looking for bikes that fly up climbs and provide a comfortable, stable, and fun experience on the way back down. While they aren't quite XC race bikes, they also aren't exactly trail bikes. So what are they? Eager to see what all the hype is about with these short travel, ride everything mountain bikes, we brought together 4 pedal-hungry and downhill-capable bikes to see how they perform across various terrain. Our goal was simple: find out where this exciting new category of mountain bike shines, what unique features set them apart, and ultimately help riders discover which bike would best complement their trails and preferences. Here we go! Boom! What's going on, dudes? How you doing? Let's check out these test bikes. Skimming through most brands' websites in 2022 will illustrate the popularity of these short travel bikes that receive a small dose of longer, lower, slacker geometry combined with a mixture of lightweight and durable components. Head angles, stem lengths, bottom bracket heights, rotor sizes, and tire casings appear to be picked from various disciplines, creating bikes that, on paper, sparks one's imagination about the efficiency, speed, and confidence such a creation would foster.
Aggressive tires on the Alchemy.
We have a chain guide,
Remote lockout.
double remote lockout, chain guide, and XC tires. That's a blend. That's $1 million question these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
What tire pressure are you running?
20, I'm gonna do 22.3. That's usually where I'm at. 22.3.
I don't know 160 rotors to stop much of anything.
Well, we'll see how good it does on a 210-pound man.
That's a torque wrench, isn't it?
Speaking
Yeah.
of torque wrench, there's your torque wrench.
And it's got like a
Carbon fiber. Woo!
What are you speculating?
just looking at the bar. What do you think of the bar? Just
Like the
like
roll?
the rise roll.
It looks really confusing.
The roll is confusing me.
It is a flat bar in it. You know,
It's like it rolled back up
Yeah.
and every other way, all in the same.
It feels weird.
There's a lot of wiggle room when you combine character traits from multiple bike genres. To keep our test as apples to apples as possible, we chose bikes that weighed within a few pounds of each other, had between 100 and 130 millimeters of travel, rolled on 29-inch wheels, and shared similar components. 4 exciting machines checked all of these boxes: Alchemy's Arktos 120, Ibis Exie, YT's IZZO, and Scott's Spark. With our bikes selected, we tagged in Vital contributors John Palumbo and Greg Montgomery to help myself, tech editor Jason Schroeder, log saddle time on each bike. With differences in body dimensions, riding styles, and setup preferences, we all believe in pedaling to earn our descents and prioritize having fun on the way back down. Greg is our forever bike setup theorist. His quest for the next best combination of unsprung and sprung weight or the optimal cockpit geometry make him perfect at thinking outside the box when analyzing a bike's performance. Originally a world-class runner, Greg is the king of maintaining a conversation for the duration of the climb while you breathe through your eyes. With over 25 years of spinning circles on 2 wheels, John is an incredibly well-rounded cyclist and an absolute fitness beast. With experience racing everything from enduro to road to Xterra off-road triathlons, his depth of knowledge covers every type of bicycle. A working man and father, John has more grit than most and logs most of his rides before sunrise. What a guy. And I'm the Vital Editor pulling the strings behind the curtain for this test session. Planning, scheduling, and participating in tests brought its fair share of challenges and exhaustion. However, it was incredibly fun to test bikes that fall outside our typical wheelhouse of coverage. And turns out, you can get pretty rowdy on a bike with not a lot of travel. With our heights varying from 5 feet 11 inches to 6 foot 1, all test bikes were size large except the Arktos 120, which was a size medium. For this test session, all riding took place throughout the foothills of Boise, Idaho. The trails immediately outside downtown Boise feature flowing single track with high average speeds with the occasional rock garden mixed in. An aggressive, heavy bike with slack geometry is often too much, and instead, midweight bikes equipped to attack punchy climbs and carry speed on rolly terrain provide the best trail experience. Throughout testing, conditions range from loose over hardpack to wet and tacky topsoil. Testers began with each brand's recommended sag and then made adjustments to match their preferences and trail conditions. We also completed a test loop on each bike that featured a timed climb and descent to compare physical data on top of rider impressions. So, how did they stack up? After jumping between all 4 bikes and ascending more feet than is probably safe in just 2 weeks, we could not believe how fun and capable each bike was in various situations. They all carried great speed, provided a surprising amount of control and confidence descending, and motored up climbs with impressive efficiency. Of course, each bike excelled in its own way and offered a specific ride experience that set each apart from the other. With the most travel in the group, it should come as no surprise that YT's IZZO was the most forgiving and capable on descents, performing similarly to a trail bike. Employing 130 millimeters of travel front and rear, we felt at ease pushing our limits, knowing that IZZO could handle plenty of abuse without punishing us for taking less precise lines. We had no problem maintaining speed through rough compressions and found it easier to float over bumps where the other bikes tended to get hung up or deflect. The IZZO was also a joy to take down mellow flow trails and had the most natural feel when hitting jumps or bowled out berms. Featuring a full carbon frame, the IZZO is the only YT model to depart from their virtual 4-link design. Instead, it uses a horse leak configuration that opens up the front triangle, giving space for a full-size water bottle and tool mount. On trail, the full carbon frame was noticeably compliant and made for a smooth ride through trail chatter. The downside to this compliance was a lack of responsiveness when pumping to generate speed. Even though we found the rear suspension comfortably supportive and progressive, we consistently had trouble maintaining as much speed as the other bikes on low-angle descents. Once turned uphill, climbing the IZZO proved to be a comfortable yet slow-moving endeavor. With a more upright and rearward seated position, the IZZO again had more of a trail bike feel that mentally made us less eager to attack climbs. The suspension was also quite active under pedaling forces and relied heavily on the rear shock's lockout to maintain speed and efficiency.
This one climbed the slowest for me. It just felt like I was, it just felt like it was getting pulled back. The tires were pretty neutral out of the bunch. They didn't lean towards more XC or more downhill, so I know it wasn't the tires. I just think it was the positioning. Out of all the bikes, I felt this one was the most necessary to use the lockout. I think all the other bikes in the test group could probably go either way, but this one was definitely a necessity to use that lockout.
However, with the rear shock mounted upside down, the lockout switch was conveniently placed low and out of reach, making it difficult to lock out the shock while riding.
One of the weak points that we found is locking out the YT. You have to think ahead of where you're going to lock it out or unlock it, because the reach on it's dangerously low to that bottom bracket.
Apart from the fact that it does feel like a trail bike when we're climbing, it does provide plenty of traction and it is comfortable. So it's less stiff, it's more comfortable, it's, some would say, more neutral, I don't know. But definitely far from the XC race bike feeling, and maybe the most lax of the group.
Weighing in at 29.4 pounds, the IZZO Core 3 build tested was the second heaviest bike in the group. It was also the cheapest at $4,299, highlighted by a Fox 34 Performance Elite fork, Fox Float DPS Performance Elite shock, SRAM GX Eagle 12-speed drivetrain, SRAM G2 R 4-piston brakes, DT Swiss M 1900 wheels, and Maxxis Forecaster tires. Standout components throughout testing included Fox's Performance Elite suspension and Maxxis Forecaster tires. While you don't get the shiny gold finish of Fox's factory level suspension, the support, suppleness, and tunability remain with Performance Elite. The IZZO was the first time any of our testers rode Maxxis Forecaster tires, and they proved to be capable and predictable for our dry, loose, and hard-packed trails. For a lightweight trail tire, the tread design was aggressive enough to maintain traction and corner support without creating too much rolling resistance. Easily the least favorite component, a part of the Core 3 build, was the 150mm YT Postman dropper combined with the low and long race-face turbine cockpit that kept us from shifting our weight rearward. We would also quickly swap out SRAM's G2R brakes. Even though the G2s employed 4 pistons and were matched with a 200mm front and 180mm rear rotor, the largest in the test, the stopping consistency and lever feel was subpar compared to the Shimano XT brakes used on the other bikes. So what's the bottom line on YT's IZZO? The IZZO for me descended the most like a trail bike in the group. It just had a little bit more ability to kind of get away with things in certain situations.
This bike is for the guy who prioritizes the sense and jumping in their trail bike. But, you know, he'll go out and climb, but he's not in a hurry to get there.
So the YT was the slowest bike, but plenty of traction, really comfortable, and it felt like a trail bike.
It's worth noting that YT offers IZZOs with drastically different build kits. The Core 3 model we tested shined most as a hard-charging mini trail bike and require too many adjustments to achieve enhanced climbing performance. For riders who are eager to fly up hills, save your money and reach for the more expensive IZZO builds with components that prioritize efficiency, weight, and pedaling performance.
This YT IZZO that we tested is a competent, lightweight trail bike that we feel comfortable taking most places. You know, obviously we did want to make some changes just to nudge it a little bit further into the trail bike arena. And we can make even more changes, such as different tires and, you know, even, you know, bigger rotors and things, maybe a longer dropper post. That would send it into, you know, even further into that trail bike category. But within the YT IZZO range, there is that dangling carrot of the uncaged model, which is in a totally different direction. You get a bike that's spec'd to the nines. I mean, 1,400 gram wheels, axis everywhere, and lockouts both front and rear. So that would be a super efficient bike that could be quite interesting in certain scenarios, especially, you know, a longer race, as it will, maybe like the BC bike race or something. It'd be interesting to test that.
Easily one of the most head-turning bikes of recent times with its integrated suspension design, Scott Spark achieved the best balance of climbing and descending performance. We tested the slacker and longer travel Spark 910 with 120mm of rear-wheel travel paired with a 130mm fork. Featuring a 65.8 degree head tube angle, the Spark was the second slackest in the group. At the core of the Spark's integrated shock design is a link-driven single pivot with a flex pivot in the seat stay that is aesthetically striking and fosters the most prominent character trait of the Spark: responsiveness. With the shock position low in the bike and the frame divided into just 2 pieces, the Spark had the stiffest feel. Removing or adjusting the shock is achieved via a removable plastic cover under the down tube. Setting sag is done with a sag indicator sticker on the seat tube pivot or by peeking through a window cut out in the frame. Since the sticker option requires a second set of eyes to set sag, we opted for the window option even though it took some patience to move the shock O-ring. But patience is a virtue, and luckily we only had to set sag once per tester. Integration continues with all cables running internally through the Synchros headset. Plastic covers around the stem and special headset spacers guide cables through the headset, creating a snug fit that made the Spark the quietest bike in the group. I feel like most people that saw this bike when we were out riding the last week commented on the cockpit setup with all your cables running through your head tube. And personally, like when you're riding, looking down, it's such a clean cockpit. Running a Garmin, you have the built-in mount. Like I loved how it all looked. I get the other end if you're, you know, going to be wrenching on your own bikes. I'm sure it adds some complication to that, but personally, I was a fan of it. My only reservation and hesitation with the bike is that the way you buy it with how the headset spacers are and it all being an integrated system, you have limited options to mess with how high your stem is. And I would definitely lean towards doing bars that are wider than 760 mils. I think probably most people nowadays are running bars that are wider than that. The Spark 910 also features Scott's proprietary lever-actuated twin-lock suspension system that simultaneously adjusts the fork and shock to offer 3 ride modes. Retailing for $6,299 the 910 build kit comes with components that perform well when climbing and descending. The build also offers riders the most flexibility to easily alter the intended use of the bike with minimal component adjustments. During testing, multiple hypothetical scenarios about component changes that would benefit the bike in either direction were discussed. For example, how much better would the Spark climb with light carbon wheels? We are only going to focus on how the Spark 910 comes stock, but it's something to keep in mind as you could easily have 2 wheel sets and end up with 2 bikes in one. The 910 build includes a Fox 34 Performance Elite fork with a Fit 4 damper, the proprietary Fox new shock, Shimano's XT 12-speed drivetrain and XT 2-piston brakes, Synchro's Silverton 2.0 wheels, and Schwalbe's Wicked Wheel tires. On the trail, the Spark was an incredibly light, agile, nimble, and responsive bike that demanded precise riding. Despite weighing 27.4 pounds, it accelerated with ease and provided a firm platform that we could press against to squeeze speed out of the smallest trail features. The Spark definitely feels like almost as fast as the Exie when you like stand up and just bang out a few quick pedals. It's so snappy and quick to get back up to speed and really feels like all of your energy is going towards forward momentum. I would describe the bike on descents being a very lively demeanor. It's super responsive. The rear suspension is firm and feels like it gives you a nice platform to really pump corners and over rollers on, but it also can be almost kind of bouncy in situations, which can be really nice if you're riding a trail where you're trying to maximize all the speed out of it. I also found in some situations when maybe it gets a bit more dynamic and there's a lot of compressions happening one after the other, the bike will definitely start to bounce around a little bit. It'll remind you only have 120 millimeters of travel.
It's one of those well-rounded bikes, but being a little lighter, if there was a rock coming up, you did get deflected slightly. It didn't feel as planted as some of the other bikes, but it felt like the best kind of overall descender, comfort-wise.
Despite lacking some composure, the Spark made up for lost time in rowdy sections by carrying great speed on both smooth and flat terrain. Unfortunately, like the YT IZZO, the Spark 910 came with a 150mm dropper post that limited our ability to shift our weight rearward, lowering our confidence on descents. Compounding this problem was the integrated cable system that did not allow us to raise the stem via headset spacers.
A couple of the dislikes for myself for the Spark was I really wish it had a longer seat post. It comes with a 150. My legs are longer, so I need about a 175 to 200, or I have a lot of seat posts hanging out on the descents.
When climbing, we were not immediately convinced the Spark would be a strong performer due to its upright body position pedaling. While the IZZO had a similar pedaling position, we expected the Spark to put us in a more aggressive attack mentality. It shares the same frame as Scott's full-blown cross-country bike after all. The Spark also relied heavily on the twin-lock system to maintain speed and efficiency climbing. The rear suspension design remained very active when open and would suck speed out of trails. Once we locked out the suspension, the Spark's climbing abilities were transformed and hammering up trails was enjoyable.
This thing climbing, it was pretty awesome because when it was fully locked out, it still flexed a little bit. For me, I like that, so it's not as rigid and bouncy. So traction was premium on this thing.
This bike definitely fares well with the lockout switch. I think if you ride this bike open, it's quite active, and even with it in the full locked out mode, it still provides a little bit more suspension movement than like the Exie does when it's locked out. And I think I enjoyed that more. I think it provided a more kind of like consistent feel when you're climbing. It's easier to keep a more fluid pedal stroke. I don't think maybe that might be why it's not the fastest, but I think for a lot of our trails around here that are smooth, but you'll have, the occasional rocks and bumps, it felt really good locked out because it was carrying pretty good speed and then was a little bit more comfortable.
So when I was pedaling the Spark completely open, there was some pedal-induced movement. If you're using the metric of anti-squat, it's about 80%. It really wasn't a huge hindrance for myself, but that twin lock system is right there. So obviously we were like toggling between that on a very frequent basis. In that regard, it was just super active. There were significant changes in how the bike felt. And with one click on the twin lock, it felt as if that seat tube was ever so slightly steeper. With that shock's second chamber in that, what they call the nude shock, it basically limits the travel. So it feels like a smaller bike than it actually is. The advantage of it feeling smaller is that it still has traction. So when it's completely open, yeah, it feels a little bit sluggy. One click, it was noticeably more efficient. The seated position was a little bit better. And with that third click down, it was as stiff as the other ones.
Some might find it concerning that a 120mm travel bike relies on suspension lockouts to perform while climbing, and your fears are valid. But once we became accustomed to the strong suits of each twin lock mode, we grew to enjoy the ability to quickly toggle between each mode to find the best suspension package for a given trail. What we were disappointed by was the quality and design of the twin lock lever given how reliant the Spark was on the system. The use of a single bar clamp to mount the unit to the handlebar allowed the levers to flex when being pushed, making them feel cheap and flimsy. With 3 levers bunched close together, it was also hard to identify which lever was being engaged. On countless occasions, we reached to lock out the suspension, but instead dropped our seat post. Yeah, this might be the...
So it's one turbo boost?
Yeah, so we have Eco Trail and Boost here, depending on what you're feeling. Yeah, the best part is when you go to unlock it and you just put your dropper down. I have done that like a few times. As for standout components on the Spark 910, we were surprised by Schwalbe's Wicked Wheel tires that were fast rolling with just enough grip to maintain control in descents. They weren't the lightest tires in the test, but the sidewall support was more substantial than the Maxxis IZZO casing used on all the other bikes. We also found the performance of Fox's 34 Performance Elite fork and new rear shock better than anticipated. The simpler Fit 4 damper and small rear shock held up nicely to moderate abuse and provided enough support to match the abilities of the Spark. So what's the bottom line on Scott's Spark? So I would say Scott's Spark is a perfect option for somebody who is kind of looking for one bike to do it all, and might be somebody who has 2 sets of wheels, one that's, more XC focused and super light for, wanting the bike to be as light as possible, very fast climber, efficient, nimble, all that. And then you might have a second wheel set that's a little bit burlier with burlier tires on it that, you can go do a backcountry ride or, even like some laps in a bike park, and it's going to hold its own. I think really depending on the type of rider and the trails you have, you can build this bike up to be, to be really capable in a lot of settings.
This bike I felt was the do everything bike. It didn't lean towards climbing more, didn't lean towards descending more. It did everything extremely well. This bike is for somebody who wants to just buy one bike and not have to buy and do well at everything. So if you had to, go try to keep up with your buddies on the descents, if you want to go climb for a while, if you want to swap out some wheel sets, now you have a race bike. This is, like I said, this is probably the Swiss Army bike out of the group that I feel can really charge hard either way with just a few adjustments.
While the YT IZZO was the most forgiving and capable bike descending, the Alchemy Arktos 120 took the top spot as the fastest in the group, providing excellent stability and confidence that urged us to attack descents faster. Featuring 120mm of rear wheel travel matched with a 130mm fork, the smallest Arktos in the family takes cues from its longer travel siblings and puts a premium on downhill performance. The frame is constructed from Alchemy's premium carbon and uses varying thicknesses of high-quality weave to create an extremely strong and laterally stiff frame. A flip chip exists in the lower shock eyelet, offering 2 geometry configurations plus the possibility to run a mixed-wheeled setup. We set on the slacker position, which provided a 65.75 degree head angle, the slackest in the test, and dropped the bottom bracket, creating a more descent-focused geometry package. The hallmark of Alchemy's Arktos platform is their signed suspension system that has a fluctuating shock rate. first beginning regressive, then shifting to progressive past sag, then returning to regressive for the last 15% of travel. The Arktos 120 sizing does run a little big and was the only bike we rode in a size medium. However, with the 471mm reach, the medium was on par with the other bikes, which fell between 470 and 478mm. We tested the mid-range XT build that retails for $5,999. As the name suggests, components include a Shimano XT 12-speed drivetrain with XT brakes, along with a Fox Factory Float 34 fork and Factory DHX2 shock, an Industry 9 Enduro S Hydra wheels with Maxxis Minion DHF and a DHR2 tire combo. Alchemy did an impressive job speccing all Arktos 120 models with components that complement the downhill abilities of the bike. What's more impressive is the value riders receive. Compared to the other bikes, the Arktos includes nicer components at a lower price. Even though the IZZO Core 3 is less expensive, we'd argue riders are getting a better bang for their buck with the Arktos. The closest priced bike was a Scott Spark 910, which for $300 more comes with Fox Performance Elite suspension and less impressive wheels. We know $6,000 is not cheap, but if you have the funds, you will be jumping on a handcrafted bike with premium components for much less than most brands can offer. The Arktos 120 XT build was also the only bike tested that we couldn't find modifications we'd make to better match the intended use of the bike. If we were to keep the Arktos as our own, we would, however, swap out the Selle Italia saddle for something more comfortable and trade in the Tag Metals handlebars for a bar with more rise. On the trail, the Arktos 120 was hands down the fastest ascending bike thanks to its downhill-focused build kit, impressively stiff frame, and super efficient suspension design. Despite being the heaviest at 30.4 pounds, we found the Arktos carried the most speed on rolling trails. The rear suspension was incredibly supportive, making it easy to pop over rocks or pump through corners. Getting on the pedals took a tad more energy, but power transfer was immediate and we never felt bogged down sprinting.
So throughout the whole week riding these bikes, I kind of had a gut feeling that I was going to be the fastest on the Arktos. And then when we did our time descent, I did end up being the fastest on this bike. And I would chalk most of that up to how firm the rear suspension feels, but similar to the Scott, it's in a good way where you can really press your weight into the bike to pump through turns and pump over trail features and rollers and maintain speed as well as generate speed.
Diving into more demanding sections, the Arktos still reacted like a 120mm travel bike. The rear suspension did not have a bottomless feel, and the stiff frame provided a firm ride quality.
For me, the Arktos was the fastest on the descents. It was extremely stiff. Being a bigger guy, I need something that's going to be stiff and not disperse too much energy.
As far as descending goes, I totally understand why a larger rider would like a frame like this because it's super, super stout. With my lighter weight, I found myself pinging through sections and I was not quite as controlled. And that was in comparison to all the other ones.
Luckily, the Arktos build kit and geometry improved its ability to manage rough sections. Once we understood how the bike would react in such situations, we entered knowing we would have to be more deliberate with line choice and braking points to maintain speed. Two components really stood out that helped the Arktos rise above the rest on descents. First, Shimano's XT 4-piston brakes provided an extra level of bite and consistency compared to the 2-piston models found on the Spark and Exie. Additional stopping control came from Maxxis' Minion DHF and DHR2 tire combo that sunk into the ground, finding more traction in loose soil than any other tires tested. While we weren't terribly surprised the Arktos smashed descents, we were shocked to find out it flew up climbs. Despite its weight, slack geometry, and meaty tires, the Arktos was a competitive climber against the other test bikes. The seat angle was steep enough to keep us neutral over the pedals, while the wide and flat handlebars pull our torso forward. In this position, we had no problem charging up climbs. The firm rear suspension design again played a significant role, providing a stable pedaling platform that was highly efficient.
So before we even hit the trails, I probably would have guessed that the Alchemy Arktos would have been the worst climbing, but even just on the first ride, I was really impressed with how efficient the bike is and how firm the suspension platform is. Even with the shock open, there's minimal suspension movement.
So for me, the Alchemy surprised me on the climb. It was the third out of the four. I think the only thing really slowing it down on the climb was the tires. If it had something a little more neutral and a little faster rolling, it could have definitely picked up the pace and done a little better.
The seated position was neutral felt really comfortable. I didn't have to use the climb switch. It climbed great. The quick engagement on the hub was really nice in technical situations. Nothing stood out on the climb that I was really wanting to change.
On the YT IZZO, I definitely found with that bike that I had to ride with the rear shock locked out to, make it pedal kind of as good as the other bikes in the group, where with the Arktos, I didn't find it as necessary to be reaching down and locking out the shock all the time. I didn't notice the bike moving hardly at all with it open, and it helped maximize traction, a little bit more comfort, made it easier for me to just spin circles without kind of chopping at the pedals.
So what's the bottom line on Alchemy's Arktos 120? With an outstanding bang for your buck value, the Arktos is ideal for riders wanting a short travel weapon that will carry speed in every situation and won't shy away from blasting down descents.
So I would say the Arktos is a perfect bike for probably somebody like myself who is wanting a bike that's going to not hold them back on descents. It's going to be a lot of fun on descents. And somebody who, might pick up this bike and lean more towards doing changes to it that's going to lean more towards descending performance. The suspension design crushes it on climbs. And, sometimes it might remind you of that on the descents, but I think it keeps it exciting.
I believe this bike's for somebody who who prioritizes like fun. So like if you're gonna go rip out multiple miles, but you're not concerned about setting any PRs on the climbs really, but it's gonna be super efficient and extremely confident on the descents.
I just think this is, I think this is the ideal platform for a bigger guy that wants a lightweight trail bike that's really efficient. For a lighter person such as myself, I would push somebody more on the trail bike spectrum with this platform. Maybe even just jump up to 135, 150 model, just because it is so stiff that you might as well just add the extra travel. It'll still be efficient.
Finishing things off with the shortest travel bike of them all, Ibis Exie performed like a cross-country bike on steroids. With 100 millimeters of rear-wheel travel paired with a 120 millimeter fork, the Exie had the least amount of travel matched with the steepest geometry. However, we were pleasantly surprised to find out that you can't always judge a bike solely by its head angle and shock size. Manufactured in Ibis' Santa Cruz, California facility, the handmade sub-2,000 gram frame is truly a piece of art, representing Ibis' commitment to evolving their carbon processes. The Exie features balanced geometry, allowing the bike to perform well across varying terrain. Instead of using a longer stem as you would find on most cross-country bikes, the Exie uses a 50mm stem paired with the longer reach and taller handlebars. This decision alone places riders in an attack position, improving stability and confidence descending. At 74.8 degrees, the seat angle is slacker than most bikes in this travel range, while the head tube angle, at 67.2 degrees, was the steepest in the test. The Exie was the lightest bike by over 1.5 pounds at 25.7 pounds, but also carried the most expensive price tag, at $7,999 for the entry-level XT build. The build consists of a Fox 34 step-cast factory fork, Fox Float DPS shock, Shimano XT 12-speed drivetrain, Shimano XT 2-piston brakes, and Ibis' 933 aluminum wheels with Maxxis Recon race tires.
This bike is also an outlier in terms of price. It's $8,000, but it's also the base model that they offer. So when you consider these other bikes and the changes that can be made in terms of efficiency and just general spec and fit, it's going to be very difficult to really shore that up without actually considering the other factors that might not matter to somebody, such as where it's made and the quality and the long-term durability of everything, from those pivots and all this different stuff. I mean, up front, I would have a hard time spending $2,000 more, but down the road, it might be worth it to somebody. It's such an outlier in terms of price that it did muddy the waters with the other ones in terms of just like what could be done with this set as that benchmark in price.
Hitting the trails with our expectations set lower than the other bikes, the Exie proved to be a more capable descender than it looked on paper. Sure, the bottom bracket did feel a tad high, and the steeper head tube angle limited confidence in steep or technical sections, but overall, the Exie was lightning fast and incredibly fun.
I probably had the most fun on this bike, especially on the trails here locally. I was sliding all over the place, and it's not a bike that I would want to just go out and dilly-daddle around. It wants to go fast. And with a capable rider, I could see this being a weapon, especially in certain scenarios.
So I wasn't the fastest on the Exie during our time descent that we did, but I will say I probably had the most fun on this bike descending throughout the week. And I think a lot of that is that even though it's the lowest on travel, it made a lot of trails that I've ridden like countless times a lot more exciting. It made me ride much more precise, and it let me know when I wasn't online as much, but that was kind of like the allure of trying to go fast on the bike. It made it more exciting. It made it feel like I was going a lot faster because you're feeling mistakes you make and feeling the bumps that you're hitting.
On flat, rolling terrain, the Exie rose above the rest, highlighted by its ability to maintain speed with little rider input thanks to its minimalistic tires, stiff frame, and firm suspension. The low weight gave the bike a lively personality that promoted popping between lines, skipping over rocks, and hitting trailside jumps. However, unlike the other bikes that allowed us to load up the suspension and pump speed out of trails, the Exie was less responsive to rider input simply due to its lack of travel. Regardless, we carried an equal or higher average speed due to the low weight and efficiency of the bike.
I kind of liked how the bike would just break free and, slide. But it was light enough that I could place it down the trail anywhere that I pleased. So it was, I guess you could say it was sketchy, but it was also nimble enough that I was able to get out of situations that could have gone awry.
When trails became rougher, the Exie attacked descents harder than most 100 mil travel bikes, but took more effort to stay on trail, and the margin for error was smaller than the rest of the bikes. Big compressions were quite jarring, and we had to select our lines with the utmost precision to carry speed and maintain composure.
For me, there wasn't a whole lot of room for error. Like when you start getting kicked offline, you get kicked offline quick. So it wasn't terribly forgiving.
When we did execute our lines and held on through the rubble, the Exie rewarded us with an exciting and fast ride. One of the main reasons we felt so confident attacking descents with more intensity than we typically would on a cross-country bike was because of the Exie's descent-focused cockpit and 185mm bike yoke dropper post. The 30mm rise Ibis carbon handlebars and 50mm long Industry 9 stem placed our body weight comfortably centered over the Exie, while the long dropper and short standover made it easy to shift our weight back. With lots of freedom to move within the bike, we could precisely place our weight in corners to maximize traction or lean back in technical bits to improve stability and control. On the flip side, the biggest limiting factor that held the Exie back was the Maxxis Recon Race tires that lacked adequate traction. For a bike that can hold its own on descents, the tires did not complement the bike's abilities and single-handedly kept us from reaching the Exie's top speed. More aggressive tires would be an obvious upgrade that we can only imagine would drastically improve cornering confidence and stopping control. On top of having to tiptoe around corners due to the gripless tires, the 160mm rotor failed to offer the bite and stopping power needed to slow down the Exie. The weight difference between 160 and 180mm rotor is slim, but the performance is noticeable. With a larger rotor out back, the Exie would descend faster by not having to drag the brakes as often to maintain composure. Unsurprisingly, the Exie pedaled phenomenally. Just tossing a leg over the bike screamed climbing dominance. The low weight and minimal rolling resistance paid dividends going uphill, requiring substantially less effort to punch up climbs. Each pedal stroke seemed to take us further, and we completed test loops faster and with more energy remaining.
Well, no surprise, the Ibis Exie was the #1 climber, and for me it was a significant margin. I think it was because when fully locked out, it was absolutely rigid. Then that tire combo just made for practically zero rolling resistance.
So I do like the efficiency of the bike, but it was the least comfortable of all the bikes. So the seated position was great, but it was fairly stiff. I mean, it doesn't have a whole lot of travel in general. The frame is stiff, and there's only so much you can do with that. So it's kind of in that place where like other bikes would probably be more comfortable in the long run for something that you want to take out in the backcountry. But for somebody that wants to just rip with his friends after work or go do a race, this thing would be fantastic.
Engaging the Exie suspension lockout was more intuitive than the Spark's twin lock lever.
The lockout and the unlockout, and there's some clear separation. With the Scott, it's all like one piece, and if you're just like off slightly, your seat's dropping instead of locking out.
However, we hardly used it because the DW Link suspension design was almost unaffected by pedaling forces and still offered great traction and comfort.
So as climbing is concerned, with it locked out, I did find it uncomfortable, but it didn't need it. Of the bikes, the suspension was really efficient, and when it was not locked out, there was plenty of traction. The DW Link, I've had other bikes like that in the past, and it just works really well.
So what's the bottom line on Ibis Exie?
I feel that this is geared towards either somebody who has been a long time cross-country racer or somebody who just likes to ride long distances.
I would say this is for maybe the person who's ridden cross-country bikes most and is looking to get a bike that's a bit more aggressive without committing to getting like a trail bike, right? It's still low on travel, but it has geometry that kind of blurs the lines and makes it a lot more comfortable to descend on. It has a longer dropper that gets out of the way on descents, but it's still a bike that carries incredible speed. You're not going to notice a huge lack of efficiency really compared to most cross-country race bikes on the climbs. And I think for even somebody like myself who's maybe used to riding enduro bikes, like I'll be able to get on that and it'll probably surprise me, it'll probably scare me some, but it's going to be a ton of fun.
The Exie offers a unique proposition to riders seeking a pedal-dominant bike but wanting extra safety and composure on descents. If we had to pick a bike to tackle massive climbs, we would pick the Exie every time. The bike makes climbs you usually dread feel like a breeze and will leave extra gas in your tank, allowing you to ride further, faster. Once pointed downhill, the Exie is truly impressive, fostering confidence unlike many cross-country bikes can do. Precise, fast, efficient, and stable, the Exie flies across moderate terrain. However, in more challenging and rough situations, the Exie will let you push its limits, but get ready to hold on for an exciting ride as there isn't much room for error. Well, there you have it. 4 short travel bikes done and dusted. We had a great time getting to spend time on each bike and better understand what these new age short travel bikes are all about. If there's one takeaway from the test, it's how components can heavily dictate the ability of a bike with limited travel. Whether you prioritize climbing, descending, or a combination of the two, component spec can often make the difference between a bike that meets your needs or doesn't. And in some cases, bikes offer the ability to make subtle changes that will drastically change how they perform. Everything comes down to what on-trail experience you are seeking, and starting with a bike that blends frame characteristics with a build kit that complements your riding style will save you time and money in the long run.
I'm leaning toward the Scott.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm split between the Ibis and the Scott for me. The Ibis is a little smaller and need a bit more love to kind of take a bigger beating. I think that Scott all around is pretty sweet.
Actually, I'd take it back.
You going Scott? I was super surprised. You've been pretty Scott gung ho the whole time.
I'm Scott gung-ho. I really am.
To learn more about all 4 bikes tested, head to vitalmtb.com for our in-depth individual bike reviews. And until next time, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.